Nintendo knows a lot more than it's letting on. Even though the company is reluctant to even let you see your precise playtime beyond 5-hour increments without activating parental supervision, they have numbers galore on everybody. This so called metadata can be used to build up a very precise picture of their audience. Sometimes they dig out some neat little statistically enforced facts to wow us. I always enjoy when they send us end of year playtime statistics through email, and in years gone by, they've given us commentary on how many people signed into a Nintendo Switch at least once in the 12-month period, a statistic they've used as a proxy for engagement, but not necessarily one that's completely useful. However, if I could get my hands on some lovely Switch spreadsheets of data, what would I be looking for and what do I expect them to show? Bearing in mind that there's almost no chance that any of these statistics will ever actually get shared, let's deep dive the Nintendo statistics I would love to see. Number 1. Total overall playtime for games. I guess that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, by dint of its vast install base as well as the longevity of its multiplayer functionality, is likely to be the leader on Switch in terms of playtime, but it's also possible that much of that 60 plus million install base are casual players who only have a few hours in the game. Zelda Breath of the Wild has less impressive an install base, but I think it's fair to expect that anyone owning it on average probably put in double the time or more than for Mario Kart, although some dedicated Mario Kart players probably have many hundreds or thousands of hours. Another rival for this crown might be Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which again has a very large install base. I'm not quite sure what portion of the player base are going to be obsessively playing and mastering it, but even for someone like me who isn't that interested in the online stuff, I've got at least 60 hours in the game just from the absolute huge amount of one-player content in Smash. Number 2. Title with the highest average playtime using the mean to calculate. This is different because surely Mario Kart 8's numbers would be dragged sharply down by the casual players, even as its hardcore audience drags those average playtime numbers up. Then there are titles like Fire Emblem and especially Xenoblade. Maybe some people pick these games up, play a bit and get bored, but I suspect, especially for something both as vast and as relatively niche as Xenoblade, that is less likely. I also think Tears of the Kingdom is likely to outstrip Breath of the Wild here. It took me 150 hours to get to the credits of Tears of the Kingdom, but only 120 to do the same on Breath of the Wild, so there's literally more content, but I think more of the Tears of the Kingdom audience knew what they were getting into and were going to be in it for the long haul, whereas there's more chance of Breath of the Wild owners dabbling and deciding that it's not for them and therefore the sequel wouldn't be for them. This would of course mean that the average for Tears of the Kingdom could be that much higher, even if more people have playtime in Breath of the Wild. Still, it's difficult to imagine that the average playtime isn't at least 100 hours for some of these games. I guess the only rival for this crown will be Xenoblade 3, which again takes advantage of the fact that it's not the first Xenoblade on the system, so people kind of know what they're getting into. But it's also absolutely huge, so the lack of people with small numbers of hours is likely to push the average figure up. Number 3. First party titles with the lowest average playtime. Realistically, this probably belongs to something very small and forgettable like Jump Rope Challenge, but if we just look at the bigger titles, which first-party published game was just dead on arrival? I know people will be tempted to say something like 1-2-Switch, but remember that they did make a sequel, so obviously they thought people weren't completely disinterested in the title, and after all, it does have a level of longevity in the casual space as a party novelty. Then there are titles like Endless Ocean Luminous, which were kind of dead on arrival, but even then, you would think that the people who actually picked up the game would be interested. Of course, they may be more casual fans anyway, who found the title as disappointing as many of the reviewers seem to do. I hate to say it, but I could imagine a title like Mario Strikers Battle League being in this category. There's very little one-player content, and I found the online unplayably janky when I tried it, and I don't hear of anyone doing the League multiplayer stuff online now, although presumably there is a small fan base all the same. Number 4. Most frequently booted up title. This has to be one of the evergreens, I would think, and I would anticipate it being Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Animal Crossing is designed for daily play and it feels built to win an accolade like this, but the fact that they dropped Animal Crossing New Horizons after 18 months, whereas Mario Kart 8 Deluxe not only has a bigger install base but also has the Booster Course Pass, means I feel like it would possibly be in the lead all the same. I guess titles like Splatoon would be significant too, but I really can't see there's much past Mario Kart and Animal Crossing for this particular accolade. Number 5. Title that brings people back to the console after the longest drought. So to get this, you would need to basically take the gap in play before playing a title. So the benefit of this statistic is that these are the games that may be useful to encourage people back into Nintendo's ecosystem and playing not just one game, but more games going forward. My guess is that these would be the kinds of titles that people only break out occasionally when friends are around, and would include titles like Mario Parties. Mario Kart might potentially be played a bit more often, but who knows? And particularly with the Booster Course Pass, it may well be that this brought people back into the Switch fold after a gap. There are also major games which might have reignited people's passion for the title. I hope nobody was in Switch playing drought mode before Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, given how absolutely awesome the first half of 2023's lineup was, but given the huge numbers of people who turned out for that game, it is still quite possible that it brought a lot of people back to playing Switch who were otherwise disengaged from the console. Number 6. Titles with the longest average play session. This statistic wouldn't necessarily benefit titles like Mario Kart or even Zelda, which, through their shrine puzzles, have kind of been geared for pick up and play functionality, as well as for longer sessions. My guess, therefore, is that the longest average play session accolade would go to one of the big RPGs, Xenoblade or Fire Emblem. These are the kinds of titles where I can imagine people sitting down and playing for a substantial period, and perhaps especially Xenoblade, which is not just longer but also perhaps less well suited to handheld play. Remember, Fire Emblem did very well and really kind of broke out with the 3DS, and it was positioned very close to the launch of the Switch Lite, so I think they can see that Fire Emblem particularly suits that kind of pick up and play functionality, whereas Xenoblade has always been something that is associated with the mainline consoles, or at least when it was on the new 3DS, it was positioned as a major one-player title. Number 7. Title with the highest median playtime. While the mean is a useful analytical tool, it's likely that some games would give slightly distorted playtime results when you look through this metric alone. I can well believe that there are 2 or 3 people who have just a few minutes or hours in Smash who checked it out on its reputation but didn't really take to it, for every person who has 1,000+ hours in the game. This would suggest an average playtime of hundreds of hours still between this group, but the dataset isn't necessarily representative of the experience. The median number therefore seems a more useful way to look at the experiences of more people, and here I think Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and the Xenoblade titles are likely to be the standout winners. I suspect Xenoblade's numbers are generally either over 100 hours or quite a small number, as I imagine people liable to be turned off may turn off far quicker, whereas the people who stick with it are going to stick with it for the duration. But I could imagine most people do put a lot of time into Zelda as well, and so perhaps that would still scoop the highest median playtime. Number 8. Most common area in each game to switch off the console. You see, I love Luigi's Mansion 3, I really do, but that boss with the rubber duck in the basement was just, torturous. I'm not a fan of that at all, and although I ploughed through it, I guess I'm unlikely to be alone, and I further guess that at least a handful of people just turn the game off, at least for a short while. I don't know for sure, but I like to think that Nintendo's producers do spend some time studying the points at which their audience disengages from their content and therefore tries to figure out how to hook people back in, or at least how not to disengage them in the future. Of course, realistically, most of these points will be natural pause points in the game, especially early pause points when people are still new to it and therefore potentially more likely to put it down. But if there are ones which aren't especially logical moments to stop, and that often do cause people to stop, this might give Nintendo some cause to pause. Number 9. Highest mean playing time divided by a game's retail price. So, in theory, something like Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour might have low playtimes, but because it's 1/8 the retail price of Mario Kart World, give or take, by this metric it's possible that Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour could actually emerge as the more successful of the launch games, at least over the opening month or so. This statistic clearly benefits titles with lower prices, and obviously Tetris 99 and the like are free, so couldn't really be counted. Although there are some great cheaper games, I don't know the Box Boy and Box Girl is likely to have absolutely massive hours sunk into it by the player base. I would really like to think that Metroid Prime Remastered, being a third cheaper than the $60 standard at the time, would benefit from this a fair bit, but I still suspect that the title which would have the highest mean playtime, even divided by the retail price, would be something like Breath of the Wild. Number 10. Highest playtime per 1,000 yen spent on making it. Now, I very much doubt Nintendo is precise enough to account for games individually in this way, as there's so much in the setup that it will be hard to meaningfully price. But nevertheless, I imagine that the producers have a general budget that they are expected to work to, or at least to negotiate if they expect to blow past it. Therefore, I'm sure Nintendo could put a nominal figure on the development cost of each title and use this to work out which game cost them the least but incurred the most sales as a result. The obvious answer here is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe because it's a port, but I think this is a bit misleading since you kind of need to include the development of the original game, without which there could be no port. I would say Switch Sports might be the title which probably had the least development time compared to the amount it sold, but I doubt the playtime is enormously high on that one, and to be fair, it does seem that quite a large number of the Switch Sport development staff actually came back from previous Wii Sports titles, so perhaps the development period on this one was longer than we think. In this case, I think it probably would have to go to something like Tetris 99, which can't have been enormously expensive to make, but would doubtless have racked up huge playtimes. So these are 10 stats, but of course, each of these could also be really interesting to see, subdivided by age bracket, location, gender, and style of play, handheld or docked. But regrettably, it's fearfully unlikely that Nintendo will in fact spill the beans on all of this commercially sensitive data. So for now, we must be content to speculate. Do let me know in the comments which statistics you would like to see, and if there are enough, I may do a follow-up video in the future. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, check out the Patreon for more, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.